Hi, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Chaikin Minute. I'm David Shulin. Today, in the Chaikin Minute, we're going to discuss one of the categories of the Power Gauge rating. Of course, the Power Gauge rating is our 4-category, 20-factor model that helps us to understand if a stock is likely to outperform the market in the next 1 to 6 months, bullish stocks, or underperform the market in the next 1 to 6 months, bearish stocks. And of course, we have neutral stocks. Those are simply stocks that the data is not saying anything. Sometimes you get mixed data, muddled data that doesn't add up to anything actionable. Those are your neutral stocks. Comcast is the stock we're going to look at today as we take a deeper dive into the technicals category of the Power Gauge rating. Now, in a couple previous videos over the last few weeks, we've talked about fundamentals in the Power Gauge rating. We've talked about earnings in the Power Gauge rating. So let's talk about technicals. And to do that, we want to see the Power Gauge rating details for the stock we're looking at, which is Comcast. Outside our window at Chaikin Analytics headquarters here in Philadelphia, 2 big shiny Comcast towers hanging out right there. So why not look at Comcast? I look at it all the time out the window, and we all do, I guess, on our TVs most of the time, and the internet I'm using right now. Anyway, so we see the 4 categories that make up Comcast's Power Gauge rating. Remember, these are rankings. Everything is compared to other stocks. So Comcast has neutral financials and earnings and bullish technicals and experts. And when combined, compared to other stocks, that still makes it bullish. That makes it more likely to outperform the market than other stocks that are not bullish or very bullish, right? Well, let's talk about the technicals section specifically. We're going to click technicals, the plus right there, to expand and look at the 5 factors that make up the technicals category. Now, these include relative strength versus the market, which is very bullish, along with price strength and price trend rate of change. It's what ROC stands for, which is bullish as well. That's one we get a lot of questions about. We'll talk about it in a second. We see very bullish Chaikin money flow, and we see bearish volume trend, and all together, that gives us a bullish category of technicals, again, compared to other stocks, right? You could have a high number for one of these and still be bearish, red, and to the left. It's not about the number being high or low. It is about in comparison to other stocks. What do I mean by that? Real quick. If I asked you to pick a number between 1 and 10, and you picked 9, and then we said, well, everybody picked a number. Who picked the high numbers? What's the high numbers here, right? Well, 9 is a high number. 9 out of 10, that's a high number, right? You can only get higher by picking 10. So that's high, right? Well, what if everybody else picked 10? You're the only one who picked 9. And then we did a ranking, and we ranked everybody. Even though your number was high, you might still be lower compared to others. This is a ranking system, the Power Gauge rating, because we are looking for outperformance versus the market. We're looking for those that are better than the others. It's not about high or low. It's about the comparison. Does that make sense? I hope it does, right? So that's how all of these factors are figured out. These are rankings. All the calculations for each of these factors are done, and then every stock is ranked from 100 down to 1, or whatever these numbers might be. They're not as simple as 100 down to 1, right? But those with higher or better are put at the top, and so on and so forth. And then we bucket them out, right? And the best ones are very bullish, and so on and so forth. So the technicals category here for Comcast is bullish. It's good. It's better than most, right? Tells us that the technicals section leads to more likely outperformance. Of course, we combine all 4 categories together. But how do we calculate these 5? You'll notice right away that relative strength versus the market, or relative strength versus the SPY, and Chaikin money flow, the first 2 listed here, are on our charts. We talk about relative strength versus the SPY all the time. It's part of the dynamic duo, the 2 most important items here in Chaikin Analytics. When you determine if it's a stock you want to buy or own or keep, the power gauge rating itself and relative strength versus the SPY, money flow is not far behind, right? Are institutions buying up this stock? Are they accumulating it or distributing it? Those big institutions that can move the market. So yeah, it's on our charts, but we're also counting it in the power gauge rating. We are. Let's talk about the specific calculation and how it's a little different. We'll get to the user guide to do this. Product resources and the user guide. You can also find it on the resource center. We're going to go right to the user guide here, and we will scroll down. We can find it here in the power gauge factor reference guide. Remember, the user guide is searchable, so if you just wanted to search for something, you could do that. Power gauge rating, power gauge is said a lot in the user guide, so by searching that, you're going to get almost every post returned. But let's run down to the technical section here, where we talk about where the calculations come from. So relative strength versus the market, or relative strength versus the SPY, is in fact looking back over the last 6 months. We're not looking at the last 2 weeks or the last month. We are going to look at the relative strength versus the SPY going back 6 months. This is different than how we often would read this chart. Probably not looking that far back when we're reading this chart and determining if it's something we want to own, but in comparing stocks to each other for future outperformance, looking back over 6 months makes a lot of sense. Let's think about this. Going back 6 months takes us to about here. I think we can all safely say that the relative strength versus the SPY has by and large not been strong for Comcast over the last 6 months, has it? We had a period of time about 6 months ago, 5 to 6 months ago, when it was strong, and then it's been fairly weak since then. You'll notice, though, that the relative strength versus the market has a bullish factor rating, doesn't it? Look at that. It's bullish. How could that be? Well, we just talked about it. Remember when we talked about numbers, high and low, and rankings? Relative strength versus the SPY has not been great for Comcast over the last 6 months, but guess what? The average stock has done worse. Most stocks have not done well in the last 6 months. It's been very few that have clearly outperformed. So even though Comcast has underperformed by and large since the start of April, it has still over the last 6 months been better in comparison to the S&P 500 than most stocks. There you go. It's still bullish. Interesting, right? I know people might look at this and say, oh, how could this is broken? How could relative strength versus the market be bullish? It's clearly been weak. You're right, but it's a comparison. It's a ranking. Yes, it's been weak. It's been less weak. It's still been better, right? It's still been better. You could get a 48 on a test and fail it. Get a 58 the next time. It's still not good, but is it better? Sure is, right? You can still be bad, but be better. Well, there you go. That's what the power gauge rating is about. What about money flow? All right, we can look at the chart for money flow and see that it's been pretty good. What is the calculation exactly? Money flow looks at persistency over the last 6 months. So again, we're looking back 6 months. You've probably heard us say persistency a lot when it comes to money flow, right? We look at money flow back over the last month or 3 months or 6 months consistently. And again, if we look back over the last 6 months, yeah, money flow has been green most of the time for this stock. When it's been green, it's more intense. When it's red, it's not very intense. It's just a little blip. All right. And we see we have very bullish money flow. So in comparison to most other stocks, this is far better. That's it. We look back over 6 months. Right? When we read the charts for relative strength versus the SPY or Chaikin money flow, we may be looking at a little bit of a shorter time. In the power gauge rating, we look back further. We look back further and rank and compare to other stocks. What's next? What is price strength? What does that mean? All right. So we are going to look at the ratio of the closing price to the 200-day exponential moving average. Okay. So the exponential moving average is our orange line, right? It's this line. What does our closing price look like in comparison to this trend line? Right? Where does our price fall compared to it? Is it clearly above it? Is it clearly below it? In this case, bullish. Been pretty consistent looking back for how long was it? 200 days, going back pretty far, right? Been pretty consistently above or at that 200-day double exponential moving average. Price strength is bullish. What about price trend rate of change? Okay. So this looks at a little bit of a shorter time frame. It's the 42-day change in divergence from the 200-day exponential moving average. So this is how much it has moved in the last 42 days from the 200-day. What's interesting is in the last 42 days, stayed pretty similar to the 200-day, but I guess that's better than most. What about volume trend? The ratio of the 30-day to the 90-day average day volume. So we're looking to see, is volume picking up? Is it falling off in the last 30 days compared to the last 90? Clearly here, we've seen volume drop off a little bit for Comcast, right? All of these are combined together. Volume, rate of change compared to the long-term trend line, right? The ratio of the closing price to the average long-term trend line there. Money flow and relative strength, all looking back over 6 months. That gives us our technical section here of the power gauge rating. Now, we still use the charts to further fine-tune things before we make our decisions, of course, even though these technicals are included in the power gauge rating. Our checklist helps us do that. We hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Chaikin Minute. We'll be back with you tomorrow.